church, it's easy to forget, was founded right after the American Revolution. Many of the people who led the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, were members of the Church of England and then of the Episcopal Church. Our church is organized as a representative democracy modeled after the United States. And so our own church has followed this pattern, and it can sometimes be messy, but it's helpful. For example, bishops in the Episcopal Church are elected by representatives who meet in convention from all the congregations. Bishops are not appointed from on high. That's a very different pattern from the Church of England and from most other churches around the world. We are a representative democracy as a church. Deborah and I just got back, as many of you know, a month or so ago from a trip to Turkey. Turkey has an amazing history that goes back thousands of years to places like Ephesus that we read about in the New Testament. Turkey also has an interesting, more recent history that I didn't know about, but our guide, who was Turkish, told us about this. Turkey, for hundreds of years, was part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was ruled by sultans. The sultans were dictators. So the people of Turkey had no choice of who the next sultan was going to be, and you had no way to disagree with the sultan. You either agreed or you were put in jail or executed. In the 1930s, one of the leaders of Turkey, called Ataturk, that I had not heard of before, but he's like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln of Turkey. He led an uprising against the Sultan, and they established a democratic republic in Turkey. And this has permitted Turkey to modernize and to come into the 20th and now 21st centuries as a much more modern country. The other thing that Ataturk led, and again modeled, I think, on our country, is that prior to the 1930s, Turkey was an Islamic country and was ruled by Islamic law, similar to what Iran does now or some other countries in the Middle East. Ataturk led in Turkey to the separation of religion from the government, which for that part of the world, in the Middle East, was a very radical thing and unexpected thing to do, but very wise. So Turkey is still a heavily Islamic country. Over 90% of the population belong to Islam, at least nominally. But Turkey is not ruled by Islamic law. Turkey has a quote, secular government that is not an arm of or related to Islam. One of the things that they did in Turkey, reflecting that change of the separation of Turkey's government from Islam, is they had equality of women starting in the 1930s in Turkey. Women were given the right to vote in Turkey before they were given the right to vote in the United States or in Western Europe. So it's an amazing thing that Ataturk accomplished in Turkey. But again, this was reflecting the history of our country much earlier of democratic rule and separation of church and state or of religious freedom. This is a wonderful legacy that we have given the world over our history of 250 years of democratic rule, of freedom of religion. Yet at the same time, this is something that we can't just take for granted, or I don't think we should take for granted. This needs to be protected and deepened and continued, and it takes effort to do that. I think there's a tendency in just people, as I observe people, to go back to dictatorial rule. And the reason is that democracy is messy. It takes effort. It takes thinking. We as the citizens are responsible for our own country and who we elect to represent us. And a dictatorship is do what you're told. It's simple and in some ways more efficient. And it's very easy to slide back into authoritarian rule because of the simplicity of it and the directness of it. There's also, I think, a tendency of some religious groups who would like to enforce their religion through the government in our country and to make everybody in the United States by law obey their understanding of religion. It's also, I think, related to that, is similar to the openness to authoritarian rule, is that it's easier in religion to have somebody tell you, have the government or somebody say, believe this, do that, then you don't need to think about it. One of the assets of our Episcopal tradition is that we ask people to think. If you don't like what I say, tell me. You can disagree. If you don't like what our bishop says, you can disagree. We are called to think, to use our minds, to use our reason. But that's more complicated. And we, as I said, we have our way we organize ourselves is as a representative democracy. And that's messy and slow and cumbersome. So it's tempting in religion as well to go to a more authoritarian system where one religious group through the government tells everybody what to believe. Well, I'm very thankful that's not what we do. And I am deeply thankful to God for what we've done in our country and the progress we've made. You think about when in the Declaration of Independence it says all men are created equal. What we've worked through over 250 years, when he said all men are created equal, that was literally true. Men, white property owning men, were considered equal. Over this 250 years, we've expanded saying that people of color, Native Americans, women, can vote and can elect our representatives. So we've made great progress. This is not a static thing. I encourage us all to continue to pray for our nation, pray for our leaders, pray for Congress, pray for wisdom as we make due elections, and pray that we will continue to grow in these wonderful gifts of representative democracy and freedom of religion by God's grace. We will continue to be a nation of freedom and responsibility and a witness to the world.